In the chaotic aftermath of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, amid the rubble and the smoke of a city burning, a strange phenomenon occurred. As order collapsed and institutions crumbled, something else rose in their place. It was a spontaneous, disorganized, yet fiercely effective network of altruism. Strangers cooked for strangers in makeshift street kitchens. Men gave away their coats. Families shared their last loaves of bread with people they had never met. There was no looting, no descent into Hobbesian savagery. Instead, survivors later recalled a peculiar, almost euphoric sense of brotherhood. As one survivor noted, while the crisis lasted, people loved each other. This phenomenon is not an anomaly. From the Blitz in London to the flooded streets of New Orleans after Katrina, and more recently, the neighborhood mutual aid networks that sprang up during the COVID-19 pandemic, history is replete with evidence of a counterintuitive human truth. That truth is that hardship often brings out the best, not the worst, in us. For decades, psychologists and evolutionary biologists were puzzled by this. The selfish gene theory suggested that organisms are wired primarily for self-preservation and the protection of their immediate kin. Why then would a person recovering from their own trauma extend a hand to a stranger? Why does suffering, which arguably should make us retreat and hoard our resources, instead frequently spawn a powerful drive to give? The answer lies in a complex interplay of evolutionary biology, neuroscience, and psychology. It is a concept researchers call altruism born of suffering, or ABS. It turns out that kindness is not just a moral virtue. It is a biological imperative, a survival mechanism, and perhaps the most potent antidepressant nature has ever devised. To understand why hardship spawns altruism, we must first look at our evolutionary history. For a long time, the dominant narrative in evolutionary biology was competition and survival of the fittest. In this view, altruism was a puzzle. If I give you my food, I have less. If I run into a burning building to save you, I risk my genes perishing while yours survive. However, this view ignores a fundamental truth about Homo sapiens. We are an obligate social species. We cannot survive alone. Our ancestors, who were purely selfish, died out because they were ostracized from the group or failed to receive help when they inevitably needed it. Those who developed a capacity for cooperation and shared sacrifice survived. Classic evolutionary theory explains altruism through kin selection, meaning we help those who share our genes to ensure our lineage continues. But disaster altruism often extends to total strangers. This is where group selection and reciprocal altruism come into play. In a crisis, the boundaries of the self expand to include the tribe. When a community is under threat, the survival of the individual becomes inextricably linked to the survival of the group. Evolution has equipped us with a tend and befriend response, a term coined by psychologist Shelley Taylor. While the fight-or-flight response is well known, it is metabolically expensive and often isolating. The tend and befriend response, driven by different hormonal pathways, compels us to protect offspring and seek out social groups for mutual defense. This response is particularly prevalent in females but exists in all humans, serving as a biological glue that holds societies together when external structures fail. If altruism has a physical home in the body, it is arguably the vagus nerve. This wandering nerve, the longest of the cranial nerves, connects the brain to the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. It is the central switch of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system that calms us down. Research has shown a fascinating link between vagal tone, which is the strength of the vagus nerve's response, and compassion. People with higher vagal tone are better at regulating their emotions and are more likely to exhibit prosocial behavior. When we witness suffering and feel a compulsion to help, our vagus nerve is activated. It slows our heart rate and induces a feeling of calmness and connection. But the relationship goes both ways. Acts of kindness stimulate the vagus nerve. This stimulation has profound physiological effects, including reducing inflammation in the body. Since chronic inflammation is linked to almost every major disease, from heart disease to cancer, kindness is literally a health booster. The cellular impact of kindness goes even deeper, down to our DNA. Telomeres are the protective caps at the end of our chromosomes, similar to the plastic tips on shoelaces. As we age and experience stress, these telomeres shorten. When they get too short, cells can no longer divide, leading to aging and disease. Remarkably, studies have found that compassion and altruism can buffer the shortening of telomeres. The neuroimmunosenescence integrative model proposes that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for empathy and decision-making, modulates the vagus nerve, which in turn regulates the immune system and inflammation. When we engage in compassionate acts, we are essentially sending a safety signal to ourselves, preserving our telomeres, and, potentially, extending our lives. The crucial distinction in neuroscience that explains how people can sustain altruism during long-term crises is the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is feeling with someone. If you see someone in pain, your brain's pain centers light up. you vicariously experience their suffering. While this connects us, it is metabolically draining. Too much unmanaged empathy leads to empathy, fatigue, or burnout. Compassion, however, is feeling for someone, accompanied by a desire to help. Neuroscopically, compassion activates different pathways, specifically those associated with reward in the ventral striatum and affiliation through oxytocin. Tanya Singer, a neuroscientist at the Max Planck Institute, has shown that while empathy can lead to distress, compassion is regenerative. It gives us energy. This explains why disaster volunteers often report feeling energized despite exhaustion. They have moved from the draining state of empathy, feeling the pain, to the empowering state of compassion, seeing the pain and doing something to change it. Psychologist Ervin Staub, a survivor of the Holocaust, pioneered the concept of altruism born of suffering. His research challenged the notion that violence only begets violence. While it is true that trauma can lead to aggression in the cycle of violence, Staub found that for a significant minority, it leads to the opposite, a profound commitment to helping others. This is not merely resilience, which is bouncing back to baseline. This is post-traumatic growth, or bouncing forward. The experience of suffering breaks open the ego and shatters the illusion of invulnerability. For many, this rebuilding process involves integrating the trauma into a new identity focused on service. Why do some survivors become aggressors while others become altruists? The research points to several moderating factors. First is received help. Survivors who received even small acts of kindness during their ordeal are far more likely to become altruists. This active bystandership plants a seed of hope, proving that benevolence exists even in hell. Second is making meaning. The ability to frame the suffering as a catalyst for understanding others is key. The survivor thinks, I know what this pain feels like, and I have a unique power to prevent it for others. Third is the difference between healing and festering. Unprocessed trauma tends to turn outward as aggression, while processed trauma turns outward as compassion. A remarkable finding in ABS research is that this altruism is often inclusive. It extends beyond one's own group. Studies of survivors of ethnic violence often show that they are more likely to help out groups, people not of their tribe or religion, than those who have not suffered. The shared identity of victim or survivor supersedes ethnic or national boundaries. Author Rebecca Solnit coined the term disaster utopia to describe the unique social atmosphere that arises during catastrophes. We are conditioned by disaster movies to expect panic, looting, and selfishness. The reality is starkly different. In the wake of the Blitz, Londoners defied class structures to shelter together in the underground. After 9/11, New Yorkers walked calmly out of the city, helping the injured, while an impromptu armada of civilian boats evacuated 500,000 people from Lower Manhattan. This was the largest maritime evacuation in history, larger than Dunkirk, and entirely unplanned. Disasters function as a great leveler. The things that usually divide us, such as wealth, job titles, and social status, instantly lose their value. A hedge fund manager and a janitor are equal when both are waiting for a boat to escape a flooding city. This suspension of hierarchy allows for a more primal, egalitarian form of social connection to emerge. We return to our factory settings as cooperative primates. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a global laboratory for this phenomenon. As governments struggled to respond, mutual aid groups formed organically. In Brooklyn, New York, a group known as Bed-Stuy Strong used Slack and Google Forms to organize a grocery delivery network for the immunocompromised and elderly. They moved millions of dollars in aid and supported tens of thousands of people, all without a formal NGO structure. Similarly, in the UK, the Leighton Linslade Helpers transformed a Facebook group into a town-wide operation, coordinating prescription pickups and food banks. Crucially, these groups were not charity, which implies a hierarchy of giver and receiver, but solidarity, which is neighbors helping neighbors. These groups proved that the bystander effect, the idea that people will watch a tragedy without intervening, is largely a myth in high-stakes environments. When the need is clear and the systems fail, people step up. Why does helping feel good? Evolution has rigged the deck to ensure we cooperate. When we perform an altruistic act, our brain releases a cocktail of happiness chemicals. Dopamine, the reward chemical, gives us a hit of pleasure, reinforcing the behavior. Oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, creates feelings of trust and intimacy. Serotonin regulates mood and social behavior. And endorphins, natural painkillers, produce a mild euphoria, often called the helper's high. This chemical reward system acts as a buffer against the stress of the crisis itself. By helping others, we literally medicate our own anxiety. It is a biological feedback loop. We feel fear or stress, we help others, we feel the dopamine and oxytocin, and our stress is reduced. Psychologically, one of the most damaging aspects of trauma is the loss of agency, the feeling of being helpless. Altruism restores agency. When a survivor acts to help another, they are no longer a passive victim. They are an active shaper of their reality. This shift from passive to active is crucial for mental health recovery. It is why action is often prescribed as an antidote to despair. While the biological hardware for altruism is universal, the software, which is culture, shapes how it is expressed. In Western cultures, research on post-traumatic growth often focuses on personal strength and new possibilities. The narrative is individualistic, implying, "I survived, and now I am stronger." In Eastern cultures, particularly collectivist societies like China or Japan, post-traumatic growth is often expressed through relating to others and spiritual change. The narrative is relational, implying, "We survived, and now our bond is deeper." Interestingly, studies on fatalism in Chinese culture suggest it can be protective. Viewing a disaster as fate, rather than a personal failure or random cruelty, can reduce PTSD symptoms, allowing the individual to move more quickly into a state of acceptance and communal rebuilding. The science is clear that we are wired for kindness, and hardship is the trigger that often unlocks it. But the question remains, do we need a disaster to be this good to each other? The disaster utopia usually fades as normalcy returns. Status symbols come back, hierarchies reassert themselves, and the brotherhood of pain dissolves. The challenge for modern society is to cultivate altruism born of suffering, without the suffering, or at least, to harness the lessons of our crises to build more resilient, compassionate systems in peacetime. We can do this by teaching the difference between compassion and empathy. Schools and workplaces need to understand that feeling for is sustainable, while feeling with is draining. We can also create mutual aid infrastructure by supporting local, horizontal community networks before a crisis hits, so the pathways for connection are already open. Finally, we must reframe trauma, moving the mental health narrative from one of pure damage to one that includes the possibility of growth, helping survivors see their potential as healers. In a world that often feels fractured, the science of kindness offers a profound hope. It reminds us that when the lights go out, we do not turn on each other. We turn to each other. We are not wolves disguised as sheep. We are, at our core, the species that survived, because we learned to share the fire.